This is the MHFi podcast with Carl Jensen and Doug Cunnington. We have authentic conversations about the journey to Fi, health, happiness, and some very odd tangents. We interview Fi experts, side hustlers, people on their way to Fi, and those who have reached the other side. Join us every week, and if you want the show notes and links and all that other stuff, head over to milehfi.com. Hey, it's Doug here. I just wanted to pop in before I send it to the episode to let you know this is a rebroadcast. This is an interview slash kind of a coaching discussion that we had with Lewis and Clark, which are fake names, but these guys wanted to be anonymous, which is totally cool with us. If you're only listening to the audio version, over on the YouTube side, we actually pixelated their faces so they cannot be recognized. But the reason why we're rebroadcasting is, number one, it was a fantastic episode, one of our most popular, and it's kind of about what to expect when you're about to retire. So at the time that we chatted with Lewis and Clark, they were about 5 months out from retiring. And I haven't caught up with them. I need to email them and see what's going on. But I think around this time in October of 2022, they will be not working anymore. So we will get an update sometime in the future. And the second reason that we're republishing this episode with Lewis and Clark is because Carl has been insanely busy. We actually recorded several episodes at FinCon, which was the first part of September. And then I've only seen Carl one or two times since then. And I had our friend Jake Simon help us out to record a few episodes, which I hope that you heard. And Carl's still out. So he did tell me the other day, hey, we're actually doing even more work on the house. And he's very busy working on the new house that they got. And I hear everything's going great. I'm pretty sure you could follow along with some of the progress over on Carl's Instagram, which I think is 1,500 days. So you could search for that if you don't already follow him. I'll put a link in the description so that you can go and find it. And I won't mention it. I won't mention who yet, but very soon, Carl actually hooked me up with one of our mutual friends. Carl has known him a little bit longer. And basically, I'm going to have a very awesome, very thoughtful co-host to sit in with me sometime. So I'm going to be chatting with him next week. I'm going to leave you with a big cliffhanger here. I just want to make sure everything will work out scheduling wise, but at least probably a few episodes or so, we'll have a guest host. And I hope Carl will join me back soon. Leave a comment, send us an email, carl@milehfi.com if you miss Carl and you want him to come back soon. And you could leave comments on YouTube, of course. And a final little thing before I send it to the episode. If you're not subscribed, wherever you're listening or consuming this, go ahead and subscribe. It helps us out. It sends good vibes through whatever system that you're listening or watching this on. So without further ado, let's hear this interview / coaching with Lewis and Clark. And I'll see you on the other side.
Welcome to the MHFi podcast. Hello, world. I am Carl, here with my co-host.
I'm Doug Cunnington.
And we're doing something a little bit different today. For the first time ever, we have, what would this be called? A reader case study listener. This is not, no one reads this podcast. If you do that, you're doing something wrong in life. So I'm just going to read the introduction that our guests wrote for us, and then I'll let them introduce themselves. So, preparing for early retirement. And they say, we are now approximately 5 months from leaving our employers. The heavy work of our financial planning is largely behind us. After so many years of intentional decisions and saving, we are in a strange form of autopilot, thanks to Downshift Financial. Our focus now is on being mentally prepared for such a big shift. So that's what we're going to talk about today, preparations for early retirement. So why don't y'all introduce yourselves and we'll get into the questions.
Great. And thank you for having us on the podcast. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to go by the name Clark. And this is my husband.
I'm going by Lewis.
And thank you for having us on the podcast. We live in the Washington, D.C. area. I work in the international development field. and my husband Lewis works with the federal government. And we've been intentionally getting ourselves on the plan for being financially independent from needing to work formally since about 2017. And after some big changes and very intentional planning, we find ourselves ready to actually do this in probably September. So we really appreciate talking with you today with questions we have on how to get in the right mental framework. Like the introduction said, we feel like our finances are in place. We understand the math of this, but we're trying to make sure that we go into this with a healthy mindset.
Yeah, this is going to be a real fun one. And I appreciate you submitted such thoughtful questions, but I have to tell you, they gave me some anxiety because I read them. And the last thing I want to do is give you stupid things that everyone says, like be flexible or all that type of shit, because everyone says that. So I wanted to get some good answers. And what I came to eventually is after I'd come up from my own, I'm like, why is it just about me? I thought of everyone I knew who was a local, who was retired early, and paying them for their answers. So I learned a lot from just doing this, and I hope you both do too. So yeah, hopefully this is as good as I think it will be. If it's bad, it's Doug's fault.
Yeah, I was going to say, Carl, you did a really good job like gathering information, but as I hear you say it, it sounds like you were lazy. You're like, I'm going to outsource it to my friends here, which is, I mean, that's really smart. That's good.
God, I didn't even think of that. I was looking for alternate viewpoints, Doug. I wasn't trying to outsource it.
That's a great way to frame it. It sounds like a wonderful idea.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing me under the bus.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I'm curious like how this episode happened exactly. So it sounds like you guys are in the senioritis kind of situation a little bit, and you're like, I'm a little nervous. What's going to happen on the other side? So how did you reach out to us? Because I was outside of it, so I'm just curious why we're all sitting here talking.
I think it was so in the earlier part of the intro, we gave a shout out to Downshift Financial. You had them on the podcast a couple months ago, several months ago, and we were really intrigued by that interview. And we've tried working with some financial advisors before that never quite understood the financial independence movement. And didn't quite work with us the way that we would have been helpful. And so we reached out to them and had a great discussion, and they reaffirmed a lot of our math. And they said, you guys could do this like right now. And that really took us by surprise, and kind of a bit of a jarring thing to hear someone say you could just walk away from your jobs right now. So with that, we started really thinking, all right, this is actually going to happen. It's not just in podcast world anymore. This is going to happen, and we need to get ourselves in a mental framework. And so on a whim, I took advantage of your podcast emails that you send out, and they say, respond. And so I did, and I reached out to Carl with questions, asking for advice on what he would recommend we do during this time frame, and Carl wrote back, and here we are.
Perfect. And we have a bunch of questions. We're going to go over those, but now I just want to ask you guys a couple more things. So you found out after you talked to Downshift that you can get right into it. What information did they tell you that you missed before? It sounds like you were surprised by it. So what did they tell you, and how did you miss it?
I'm not sure that we missed it. I think it's a combination of two things. When we were planning this out earlier in the process, we probably put in relatively conservative estimates of what our investments would have done over the last few years. And the stock market has done rather well despite the pandemic and everything else. So I think that exceeded our expectations of when we would reach the value, the net worth at which we would feel comfortable doing this. We also took some steps, as Clark here was saying, to prepare and get ourselves in a financial position, including selling a house we owned and moving into a condo that's significantly decreased our expenses. And so I don't think that we had really done a full sort of scrub of those two factors and how they had affected our finances by the time we started working with Downshift. And so like we generally understood we were in a good place, but it was really helpful to have professionals confirm that. And, it's not just the spreadsheet that I downloaded from, the mad scientist or something. It was, people who do this all the time, confirming that our estimates were accurate. But we had been planning towards about 5 months from now to walk away. And part of that is, as we said, I work for the federal government, and I'll have some additional benefits if I reach that step. I'll have it. So that may be worthwhile. And a couple of years ago, when we made these estimates, that's when we thought our investments would reach the point which we have reached a little early now.
Got it. Well, congratulations. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing before we get into the first question, I heard a noise, and Lewis, that was either your dog growling or Doug farting. Who wants to own up to that noise?
Doug? That was our wonderful dog. Ellie Rose is here with us today, and she's excited to be part of this podcast interview.
Fantastic.
That was the answer I was looking for.
Yeah. I'm glad she's here. Okay. Ready to get into it?
I am.
Okay. And I think probably the best format, you guys want to ask us the questions, and then we'll take it from there.
Sounds good. So I can kick off the first question. So as we're preparing for this mental shift, what has been the most surprising to you in how you set your priorities, particularly about what you want to accomplish each day, now that you don't need to be making money along with it?
Yeah. One thing I want to say before we answer is I think Doug did the whole retirement thing a lot healthier. And that's because I don't know if Doug would call himself retired. Doug still works. He doesn't really need to, but he works part-time, where I did the exact opposite. I went from working full-time to absolutely nothing. I did go part-time for a very small amount of time, but I'll try to point out the mistakes I made. But overall, I think Doug might have the healthier perspective on this. But the thing that came to me with this question is, when I had a job, you're sitting there working for 8 or 10 hours a day, and those hours aren't owned by me. They're owned by my employer. And I was a good worker. I was always on time and did my work and all that, but I didn't value it as much. And when I stopped working, I'm like, oh my God, all this time belongs to me now. The next 8 hours, I've got kids. So between the time I drop them off and pick them up from school, I own that time and it belongs to me. So I started using my time much more. I don't know what the word is. It gave me a little bit of anxiety because I'm like, I have to use this time effectively because I earned this, and no one owns me now. If I screwed up, it's on me. So yeah, and that led to other things. I decided I needed a routine. I needed to put some structure around it. And the last thing was planning your day. If you've got 7 hours in the middle of the day, one thing I discovered is my energy levels are higher in the morning. So if I need to do an intense workout or some heavy, thoughtful activity, I structure my day so I do that first thing in the morning when I have willpower, when my energy levels are high. So, yeah, I think that's it. How about you, Doug?
Well, I have a follow-up. So how did it manifest itself when you were like, oh, I now own my time? Did you just do a bunch of shit and take on too many projects, or like what actually happened? If you could walk us through maybe like an average day when you're looking back and you're like, that was a bad idea. Yeah,
I did the wrong thing for like the first 5 years. It's only very recently that I've become better adjusted. So yeah, some of it is because we were in the middle of a home remodel when I stopped working. So I had that to finish. And then we bought another home that needed work. So I have a hard time balancing my time. So at first I would just throw myself into the house for the first 4 or 5 years and do nothing but that. Hence the current state of my health, which isn't as good as it could be. I think that's where a routine helps out too. Even if you have that other thing, even if you're going part-time, set a routine, say, I'm going to do this between 8 and 10, and I'm not allowed to work on the house or whatever that other thing is. And between 10 and 12, I'm going to give my time to go for a walk or exercise or whatever, and stick to that and make yourself conform to it.
Okay. And then how long have you been retired?
April 2017. Geez, 5 years.
5 years. And you did say you made the mistake for about 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, like 4 years and 10 months. It's only fairly recent until I've gotten it right. And I hope you learned from this. It doesn't sound like, from your questions that we'll get to, it doesn't sound like you're going to fall into my trap. And it seems like you're going to do the opposite, which is great.
Yeah. And you're thinking about it ahead of time. So yeah, like Carl said, I sort of eased into the retirement, which I don't describe myself as retired, with the internet retirement police and everything, but I work maybe 15 to 20 hours a week, depending on the week, and try to take big chunks of time off. And it's because I was working full time with some side hustles, got laid off, and then started working on the side hustles full time. So it was really easy for me to sort of shape my day into what I wanted it to be. However, even after reaching FI, I still was chasing money because that's what I was used to doing, which, I mean, I think we can all relate to that. And it felt kind of good to be productive, and then you're validated by earning more money. And it took me a little bit to figure out that I should probably reshape things and I didn't have to do things for money, exactly the root of this question. So I deliberately tried to be lazier and tried to be less productive, which is counter to what we usually try to do, where we're like, I want to be more productive. And I've spent a lot of hours trying to figure out how to be more productive. So to turn your back on that and then figure out how to do the opposite and maybe have a little slack in the schedule was a little bit tough. One other piece was just looking to do things that were fun or that would make me happy. So when I looked at the activities in the business and the job of side hustles, I would start killing these pieces of the business that weren't fun or were annoying, so that I was only left with the good stuff. So very selfish when it comes down to it. But I mean, who else am I like trying to make happy? A bunch of other people that might judge me for being lazy. That doesn't seem like a good use of my effort or what I think about. So for me to just aim for the stuff that makes me happy, that's fun, like it's perfect. So that's kind of where I arrived at.
I have one follow-up question. Do you still earn money? Do you still enjoy earning money?
Yeah, it is fun. I mean, because you're testing ideas, and it's you can't fake it, right? It's a validated idea. It's validated that it's successful because you earned money from it. Of course, you can have some mixed up goals in there and some ulterior. What word am I trying to say, guys?
I think
ulterior.
Yeah,
Ulterior motives.
Yeah, I got lost after that second syllable. Wow. I'm a pro podcaster. What's going on? So you can get a little mixed up there, but generally it works out okay.
Yeah, I had this weird thought when I first stopped working, and my thought was, I can't earn money because then I'm not retired. And then after a year of that, I'm like, well, why not? That's pretty stupid. Who cares what the internet retirement police think? It's okay as long as you're not compromising yourself. And the funny thing about that is a lot of times you start doing things you really enjoy doing and people want to pay you for that.
Yeah.
Hopefully someone wants to pay us for this podcast at some point. But
someday.
To dare to dream.
Well, I think our next question is sort of related to it. We're expecting that the first few months will sort of take a lot of time to have fun and have, it'll feel like a vacation, and do a lot of kayaking and camping and traveling and things like that before we set into a new normal. But we're trying to figure out after that, as we set into our new normal, how that will feel and what the best way of doing that is.
Yeah, I talked to my friend Eric about this very thing, and his recommendation was to do the exact thing that you just said, Louis, to take time off and not work, like purposefully be lazy. God, we're having a hard time with words today. What's wrong with us? I don't know. I haven't even been drinking or anything like that. So I think you're doing the right thing there, but I also want to read off a couple things that friends said. The first one is from Todd. He said, if you are ambitious enough for early retirement, you are still going to need to do something that gives you purpose. Don't be afraid to experiment and figure out what that new purpose is. The second one is from Eric, who I just mentioned. He said, make sure you have many interests, projects, etc. It can require focus to ensure you have good stuff going on every single day. Sometimes I end up with a big project and I only have little tasks to work on. Sometimes I end up without a big project and I only have little tasks to work on. That could feel like list checking. Having a big project that you can work on every day provides many opportunities. And I started thinking about what all these people do, what all these early retirement people I know, how they spend their time now. Doug and I have a friend named Steve who was a pretty big attorney. I went hiking with him on Thursday and he was telling me how he would argue cases in like appellate courts. And I'm not even sure what that is. I should have paid more attention in school, but it sounded pretty fancy. And I know I think it took him 7 years to unwind his legal career. And now he makes these crazy Christmas wreaths and trees with LED lighting. And they're super cool. He just got a patent for it. He might be on Shark Tank and all this crazy stuff. Pete, Mr. Money Mustache, he was a tech guy. He worked for, I think he did router software or firmware, and now he's a carpenter and builds stuff. Eric, the guy who I just mentioned, he does all kinds of different stuff. He does coding part-time. We can talk about that a little bit more. And he makes furniture. Todd, the person who I mentioned, is a woodworker. He teaches classes. So I think the core thing from all these people, everyone I know who's happy with their fire life, is they all work. There's that bad 4-letter word, but they all do it on their own terms, and they sure as hell don't do it for 40 hours a week. They do it for 10 or 20 hours a week. And what that work looks like to you could be different. Maybe you want to go back and do part-time consulting with what you did before, or maybe you want to do it for 3 months of the year on a project basis. But it seems like that's a core to a happy life, and it certainly is to mine. And I think that's why your situation has worked out so well, Doug.
Yeah. And I was going to say couple other layers. I like the crowdsourcing, by the way. Those were good answers there. So I won't repeat anything, but I think it's good to have some slack, and it's okay to be bored and a little bit uncomfortable. So I know, like I said, I ended up doing too much for a little while, and like my calendar would be pretty full, and that kind of stresses me out just inherently. So as I've figured things out that I want to have less things to do and be a little lazier, having like the open calendar and leaving that slack is good. And then you also have the opportunity of someone, if Carl texts me and it's like, hey, do you want to grab a beer? I may have just an open few hours. I'm like, sure. Yeah. I'll go ride the bike up and we'll have a beer and just hang out for a little while. So, and I think as you're creating more slack in your schedule, Carl, like you'll have more of those opportunities as well. Cause like a lot of times you're busy, you're like, I got to run, go do this other thing. Or I remember earlier this year, you were going to different hardware stores all over the region because they were out of 2x4s or something, right?
That is right. I was putting solar panels on. I actually woke up at 5 a.m. to catch Home Depot when it opened. Yeah.
And going a little deeper, Lewis and Clark, do you like to have a lot of structure in your days, or have a little bit more of a free form or a little bit of a balance? I'm just curious, like what you think right now. Each of you, hopefully it kind of lines up.
Yeah, I think at least for me, this is Clark. I think that I do better with structure, and I also do better with a sense of routine. Like right now, we have a morning routine where when we get up in the morning, we have coffee, we do yoga. One of us will work out, the other one of us will walk our dog, and we take turns with that, and then actually get ready for the day and start work. And we've been talking about how even in September and onwards, when we can push it back and not do that at 6 a.m, we can do that at 8 a.m. But there's still a really nice importance of that routine and structure, to at least for me.
Yeah, I think that structure is is where I'm comfortable, but it's also been, I've been working for so long, it's hard to imagine like much time beyond that without structure. Like you can have a vacation or you can have a weekend that doesn't have structure, but what does that feel like having not having that structure 2 weeks in? I don't know. So probably structure would be safer, and then we'll see what happens without structure.
Cool. Yeah. And I think a lot of us do enjoy the routine, and your morning routine is like pretty similar to mine, except I always walk the dog and then my wife walks Georgie for later walks during the day. But yeah, like those anchor points, like even on vacation, like I try to do the same thing kind of in the morning. But I'm curious if it could be interesting to experiment, and maybe by default you'll have to, where you're like, okay, we're going to maybe keep the morning routine. That's a great way to start the day. But then after that, like no structure, see if it totally freaks you out, or if you're like, oh, you know what? I want to have one anchor point at like 2 p.m. where you take a nap. That's a good thing to do. Throw in some naps, by the way, pro tip. And just a couple anchor points, and then everything else is kind of open, and you can see like, all right, I like that a couple days a week, or I want that every day, or I don't like that and I want to have more pieces. But I would say like go to each extreme and then kind of find your way in the middle. I don't know. Any thoughts on that? I mean, that's how I like to do things, like go one extreme to the other, so you get the full contrast. So Carl, any thoughts on that? Yeah,
I'm curious. I think anchor points are really good because there's probably some psychological term for it, but I think it's good to have a little bit of tension in your life. And if you know every day at noon, Lewis and Clark are going to meet to go for a walk, it creates maybe a little bit of urgency, and not like anxiety would be too far, but it creates a little bit of tension in your life and maybe gets your ass in gear to do stuff. And I don't know, that makes me happy. I would go nuts if my life was completely unstructured.
Yeah. Yeah. Then how about you guys? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's where it will be nice in the first couple months, where it really is more of this vacation mindset, and we can spend however much time we want hiking or kayaking or just laying on the couch, not doing anything. And our dog is grumbling there in the background, letting us know that September can't come here soon enough. And, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting too. And as well with the changing seasons, the longer we're in that time of year now, where the days finally start to feel longer. And so you just feel like you have that much more time to enjoy and that much more time to fill, versus the dark of winter, where you feel like you get a whole 4 hours. And that's one of the things I'm excited about, is being able to enjoy that much more time outside in January when it's actually still light out. And so I could see where it's almost like a seasonal shifts of what the anchor points look like and what time of day the anchor points are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And side note, your dog is going to be happier than it's ever been its whole life. Georgie's alone for like maybe 20 minutes a day. It's ridiculous. We're all very codependent, but we love it.
Yeah, I have a couple more random thoughts. Clark, what you said about going out for a walk while it's still light out in the middle of winter, it's so wonderful, and it's such a luxury. I remember when I worked, I had this big window with a mountain view in my office, and I'd turn around and see the mountains. I'm like, oh, that looks so nice. And even now, sometimes I'm like, oh, look at that. Like, it's fluffy, snowy. I'd love to be outside. Like, what the hell am I doing? What the hell am I doing? Go get your ass outside, dummy. Like, you can do whatever you want. It's the little things that are such underappreciated luxuries. But the other thing, going back to a more serious note, is there were two people I talked to who, when they retired, they didn't have anything to do. And both of them said it gave them great anxiety. And curious enough, both of them said it took them 2 years to really find their footing. And the question I asked both is, was that a valuable experience, not having something to transition to? You didn't have anything to step off on. You had to find yourself. And they both said, yes, I think I'm in a better place because I really had to take this time for introspection and to figure myself out. So even though it was stressful and I had anxiety at the time, I'm in a better place and I have a more satisfying life as a result of it. So if I were to give you any advice based on that, don't put too much pressure on yourself. And I think that's where I kind of got it wrong. I was so worried about that I just threw myself into other projects. So don't do as I did. Any other follow-ups, Lewis and Clark?
Yeah, I think sort of as you were saying, that these people were speaking of, I think I've come to peace that I just need to jump off the cliff and see what happens, and I will go through some period of anxiety of trying to understand, who I am and what I do when the structure that I'm used to is gone. And, part of what we're talking here is about how to sort of like mitigate that and put some structure on it. But also, I think it's just a thing I have to go through, or I'll end up regretting that I didn't do it when I had the opportunity.
That's perfect, because I think it's all expectations. So if someone thinks they're going to be super happy right after they retire, and then they're trying to figure out what the meaning of life is, that's pretty rough. But that it's going to be a little uncomfortable, and you're like, I'm planning for it, and probably have some, coping mechanisms or strategies to maybe journaling or something like that. So you could work with those thoughts or something. So cool.
Most great things in life come from discomfort. Nothing good happens if you're sitting around the couch eating Cheetos all day, although it's okay to do that for a small amount of time.
Yeah. All right. What's next?
All right. So our next question is, looking back on your own experiences, if you had this kind of concrete schedule where you knew that you were just a few months away from being able to walk away from your employment, what is one thing that you would have done differently?
For me, I wish I would have asked to go part-time sooner. I did ask my employer of that, and I expected them to say no, but then they're like, oh, yeah, sure, you can do that. What that gave me, going from 5 days a week down to 3 days a week, was the confidence to know that I wouldn't be bored in a life of early retirement, because I went from having 2 days off to 4 days off, and I'm like, man, this still is not enough. I need more of this. So after 6 months, I'm like, I'm done. So I wish I would have done that sooner. And this might be a crappy answer for you two, because you're already at the end of your journey. But yeah, that's one thing I wish I would have done.
Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned before, my transition was so seamless. Like, looking back, it was planned perfectly, but it wasn't. It just was an accidental transition that was nice. And for me, and again, like Carl said, you guys are kind of past the point, and I wouldn't recommend that you like start up side hustles and like transition, because you're not at the same spot that I was. But yeah, I wouldn't really do anything differently, because it was so gradual that I shaped it exactly how I wanted it to be.
Yeah, one thing I thought about with you two is, from our previous conversation, you both have pretty, I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is, pretty rigorous, important jobs. I'm not sure. I could easily see where your identity would be tied into your jobs. It's not like you're working at the Taco Bell drive-thru or something like that. So I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think you'll have a hard time separating yourself from your job and that identity? As you sound like heavy hitters. You both have worked pretty hard in your careers.
Well, that's flattering. Thank you. I don't think so. I mean, I think that I have, my job has been a lot of my identity for a long time, but one of the reasons that we're leaving is because it's reached the point where I've sort of worked that out of my system. I think the job I do is very important, and it's very important to be done right. But I also know my colleagues will carry on without me, and the country will be safe. So I've worked that out of my system, and I'm ready to try something new and not have this work be as to be the center of my life as it used to be.
I think my response is a little different from that, and one of the differences too of how Lewis and I are approaching this is, one of the primary things that I do with the company I work for is help bring in more clients and bring in more funding for the work that we do. And I think that the skill set that I have could be translated to also using the same skills, but helping with like local nonprofits and much smaller charities and organizations that wouldn't necessarily be able to afford huge daily rates of consultants. But if someone just knocks on the door and says, I'm really passionate about the work that you do, and I'd love to help you out, what could we do together that would be helpful to you? And where I don't have to care what the income side of that looks like. I think that's something from this that I'm looking forward to being able to do, that I don't have the time or the bandwidth or the energy to do right now. But I think once we get to the other side of the vacation-y mindset of this and start to get an itch of what's next, I think that's something that has been coming to mind as something that I'd like to explore.
What's next?
All right. Well, I was wondering, were there any financial or other things that you found were easier when you had a full-time job, a normal job? For instance, on the financial side, we have been the Downshift guys advised us to increase our access to credit in case there's a stock market downturn early and when we're not working, so we could sort of ride that out. And so that's certainly, I think, easier when we've got tax documents that show we still have income to get access to that credit. But I don't know if there are anything else, either financial or otherwise, that you're glad you did before you made the transition, or wish you would have done before you made the transition.
The one thing is that it sounds like this is not an issue for you two, since you said you transitioned from a house to a condo, but buying a house is a major pain in the ass if you don't have W-2 income. You either have to pay cash, try to get a portfolio loan, or have 2 years of income from whatever your corporation is, and that's a pain in the ass too. So that super annoys me, because banks don't give a shit what your net worth is. They give a shit about W-2 income. But I'm kind of curious, Lewis, you mentioned the access to credit. Do you care to comment any more on that? I've discovered margin lending in the past 12 months, which I think is pretty cool. And I just wrote a post about this actually, because I can borrow money like under 1.5%. So if we didn't have income and there was a downturn, I would just hit that up instead of taking money after a 20% hit to the markets. Do you care to talk about what your credit line is, or where you got that from?
Before you answer, can you define the margin line of credit for people?
Yeah, sure. So you can only do this with a post-tax portfolio, and mine is with E-Trade. If anyone has heard about this, we'll put a link to the show notes. Mr. Money Mustache wrote a good article about it. He did his with Interactive Brokers. I originally had mine with that, and then I moved it to E-Trade because they gave me a better deal, so you can negotiate it. But what they allow you to do is borrow money against your after-tax portfolio. So I think we've got about $2 million in ours, and it fluctuates because the amount of money fluctuates. But I can borrow about $1 million to do anything except to buy stocks with. So I put solar panels on my house, and I didn't want to pay for it with my own money, because if I can borrow 1%, I'll let them pay for it, at least temporarily, and just take the interest hit on that. But yeah.
We've done two things already, and we may do more. So one is just increase the credit limit on our credit cards. And, we pay it off every month, and we don't expect to change that. But if there were some, we really hit a hard place and had some really huge unexpected expenses, and we didn't want to take money out of the stock market, that would be an option. We've also just recently signed the paperwork to have a home equity line of credit, but not, it's just sitting there if we ever want to access it, to take that money out. And then the Downshift guys recommended both of those, and they've also talked to us about it may be some technically different than what you did with the margin thing, but essentially the same, having a standby line of credit against our investments that we could access rather than liquidating the investments.
So, Doug, you talked about you had side hustles to make it easier to deal with.
Yep. And again, I wouldn't recommend, you guys in the position that you're in to try to start some side hustles or something, but that was just naturally what I was doing. So I would say for other people who are maybe a few more years out, like maybe pick a hobby or something you're interested in, figure out how to make a little side hustle, and then it can ease the transition. And then, maybe when you do stop working full time, you're just doing like 1 or 2 days of work or something like that. And it could be something fun. Like I would probably enjoy pouring beer at one of the local breweries for like 1 day a week. You probably get a shift beer. You're around people that are drinking beer. It's a good time. So you can figure out, what it might be for you. But something like that could be fine. It doesn't have to be like an entrepreneurship type thing. It could be just doing a part-time, few hours, help out a small business or something like that.
Doug, would you give me, if you did do that, would you give me free beer when I came in? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you should do that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no downsides. As I think about it more, I'm like, yeah, I could bike to it, probably have a lot of friends hang out. I mean, they would want me to work there.
Yeah. Lewis and Clark, feel free to groan for what I'm about to say, but I wonder if anyone has ever done an asparagus beer. And if not, this might be Doug Homebrew, so this might be a niche. And I wonder if you could get the same side effect from the beer brewed with asparagus.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and I think it'd be great for St. Patrick's Day because it would have the green color. So I have about a year to experiment and really hone in the recipe. I mean, there's a big demand for vegetable flavored beer. You know?
There is a brewery in Illinois that does mushroom beer, which sounds completely disgusting.
Like regular or like the psychedelic kind of mushrooms?
I think it's regular. You're not gonna
Portobello, boring.
Does not sound good, but
okay. So anything else before you leave the full-time gig?
I don't think so. I thought about this a lot, and there's really not much you can do before and after. I mean, I don't know, if you were really, really paranoid about leaving, maybe you try to structure things so you've got a parachute, or you can go back to your plan, you can go back to your job. I always think sequence of return risk is a little bit overrated because deviating a little bit from the question here, but the best time to go back to work is right after you left it, which is the definition of sequence of returns risk, a downturn shortly after you left your job. So yeah, I can't really think of anything else to add here. The house is a big one, and that's severely annoying to me, but that won't be your situation.
All right. I like this next one.
Yeah. So our next question is, as you approach this, what recommendations do you have on how you explain this to your family, your friends, and your coworkers?
I was such an idiot when I retired. I'm like, people are going to ask me what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell them I'm retired, and they're going to be like, wow, how did you do that? And then I'll tell them, and then they're going to be like, oh my God, that's so awesome. I'm going to do the same thing. And I don't think that's happened even once. You tell people, and then they kind of look at you strange. I had someone ask me if I had a terminal disease. I'm like, no, I don't have cancer. I just, I wanted to do other shit with my life. I asked my friend Eric, and he said, most people don't get it. As you're going through it, it's a really big deal in your life, and you'll want to talk about it. But for non-fire people, it can cause hurt feelings and jealousy. Relationship, peace, and happiness are much more important than educating, he has educating in quotes, people on the 4% rule or whatever. And I think that's so true, because unless you think you have an in and people ask you about it, most people just don't care. And even worse, they think you're some kind of like hippie or some shit. And yeah, it always leads to an awkward situation. So I never tell people I'm retired now. I don't make up stuff, but I'm just like, yeah, I've got some stuff on the internet going on. And that usually confuses them too. Like, are you on OnlyFans? I'm like, no, you're mixing me up with Doug.
Yeah. So I didn't have to figure this out again. I just got laid off, but I think I would say it's a sabbatical, and probably pretty soon my wife is going to stop working, and I think she'll probably tell people it's a sabbatical or something like that. And if people are interested and you sense that they like want to know more, maybe they ask some relevant follow-up questions, then you could go a little deeper. But I think, yeah, if you tell people that you're retired, you'll end up in this situation Carl described. And also, people will probably give you a bunch of unsolicited advice about how you're making a huge mistake, and you probably don't know what you're talking about, and they just, like Eric said, they don't get it. So yeah, I would say just kind of keep it under your vest there, and you'll be better off. So what were you guys thinking? Like you probably had an idea for what you were going to do. So what were you thinking, or what are you thinking you're going to do?
I was planning to just tell people that I'm transitioning into consulting. and then just never really have to get into specifics on how often I'm actually consulting.
Nice.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, family and friends, don't really understand what you do. And so then when you add consulting on top of it, that will just, end the conversation right there. So I think same for me. I think people will be like, oh, what are you going off to? And I think, some of my coworkers, I think my job is somewhat easier to understand for a person who's not familiar with it. But so I think I might get some follow-up questions. So I think I'll, have to admit, like, we've, put ourselves in a financial position where we don't have to immediately go into something new. So, I don't have a next thing lined up, and we'll, I might do some consulting. I might sort of explore some other interests and, sort of see what happens and what my next job will be. Cause I assume I will earn income sometime again, even if I don't know what it is. But yeah, I mean, to what you were saying, I'm concerned that the more I say, the more it sounds like I'm either bragging or proselytizing or an idiot, because I don't know what I'm getting into.
Yeah.
All of which I like to present myself as. I mean, that's usually what I'm trying to do.
It always lands on one of those three, too.
Yeah.
You've got it all covered right there. And the follow-up question is, what do you do all day? That's, yeah.
And I was just at a MHFi event recently, and a guy named Ian was talking about, how they stopped working. He and his wife stopped working. And basically some of the family and friends would feel sorry for them and like, oh, they don't have a job. We better pick up their meal. So even though they're doing well, like their friends are like, oh, we got to cover them. Like we got you this time. So keep us posted. That'll be interesting if that happens to you as well.
Yeah. I don't know if that will be great or awkward or both.
You're like, all right, I'll take it. It's funny. Okay. Anything else on this one?
No, I don't think so. Anything else from Lewis and Clark?
I don't think so.
Nope.
Okay, so I think we're going to transition now. We were talking about the build-up to early retirement, and now we're going to talk about life once you're actually retired. So question number one.
Yeah. You had already asked us about our identity and how it's connected with work. So we've been trying to think about how we'll mold a new identity after we leave our work and find a new purpose. So I was hoping you had some advice on that.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing that has helped me is to find community, and I'm pretty fortunate that we're in Longmont. You described it as the Mecca of fire, and that's probably true because there are a lot of people in the same boat. I was just thinking this Thursday, we went for a big hike, and we're always doing things like that when everyone else is at work. So it's pretty easy here, but I would say it's easier than ever everywhere. You can go on the Choose a Fi forums or Facebook groups, and there's all kinds of resources now. I know Mr. Money Mustache has forums. I haven't been on them in a while. So I would find people. And to build on that, what you're really trying to do is reinvent yourself, I guess. And now that I'm talking about this, one thing I did was pick up public speaking, and that's something I never, ever, ever thought I would ever do in my entire life. It just terrified me, and I think more so than most people. So I do that now, and people are offering to pay me for it, which is so very, very strange. And the other thing I do is own the co-working space. I co-own that. And those are two things I never thought I would see myself doing in 5 years post-retirement. So don't be afraid to burn whatever you're doing now down and restart. Do experiments, figure out what makes you happy. If it doesn't work, if it's not great, bail on it. But yeah, it's amazing everything that, I don't know about you, Doug, but anytime we go out with people, someone will have some idea like, oh, let's open up a bottle shop or let's do this and that. I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. That's not so much, but let's explore this one. So yeah, and I guess what this is all tied into is your ego and identity. Like, don't be afraid to let go of the person you are now and become the next version 2.0 or 3.0 of yourself.
And one thing I'll add in there is you could volunteer to mentor. So it doesn't, fit exactly, but it kind of can layer on top of your previous identity. So I volunteered here in Longmont to mentor like companies and entrepreneurs, like startups and stuff like that. So I spent a quarter on that, which, like I said, it sort of layers on top. So you can take advantage of the skills that you had before, maybe some of your network, and help other people out in some capacity. So it could be, younger people or just other professionals that are junior or even senior. I don't know, but that could be helpful.
Yeah. One other follow-up is, I think finding community and projects now is kind of easier to do. We're more of a gig economy. Like when I got out of school 20 years ago, whatever, everyone just worked their full-time job and that was it. But now you could probably go to a coffee shop or a co-working space and connect with some pretty cool people. But how about yourselves? Have you thought about community or what you're going to do to give yourself identity or purpose post job?
I think for me, it's yes, but only in vague terms. And I think I feel like I just have to jump off the cliff and see how I land. A lot of advice that we've gotten from people is to start new hobbies before you, leave, or start creating community before you leave. So you have something that sort of moves with you. And I think that sounds like really good advice, and also advice that I don't feel like I can take, because I think between, working and, keeping just, spending time with our friends and family, and having some time to relax. Like there's not a lot of extra time to, learn new skills that then I'm going to use post-retirement, or build new communities beyond our existing friends and families. So I just sort of feel like, we'll see what happens on the other side, and have to trust that we'll make new friends and find new community, and maybe through some, the things that keep us busy, like volunteering that we might do, might provide some of that, or work that we might do. And we will spend more time, hopefully, with our family, which is neither of our family is located nearby. So those lead to some things, but it also seems like there'll be gaps in the day when most of our friends and peers are working, or when we're traveling, that will be cut off from a lot of the community that we have.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that is we have a constant stream of ideas of things that we could do. We're in the DC area. We're close to a lot of national parks. We're close to the Appalachian Trail. There's groups and volunteer organizations for everything, everywhere. And so I think it'll be a matter of actually throwing our hat in the ring for those things and committing to something that we actually show up for.
Yeah, it sounds like you're set up pretty well. But one other tool that I use is just going for long walks. We talked about this actually in our last interview, and I read a Stanford study a long time ago how your brain does a lot of creative thinking when you just go for a walk. You're not looking at your phone, don't even listen to music, just walk around with a notepad maybe to record your ideas. I've come up with some of my best ideas, and it's all relative. They're probably not that great, but I get super creative when I do that. So I would encourage you to do that. And even with Mindy, the wife, just go and start talking, and we come up with all kinds of crazy shit.
Mm-hmm. One question to put you guys on the spot: any hobbies that each of you are going to get started with, or you've been thinking about it, but you didn't have time to do it? And I'll buy you a little time. I think I told you, Carl, I've been watching these acoustic guitar making videos on YouTube. It's so satisfying to watch like someone build something on YouTube, especially if they can compress like months of work into like 15 minutes. But it looks really fun. It's like a very specific kind of woodworking. And I'm like, should I get one of the kits? But I know it'll take a lot of hours and I don't have the skills, which you can learn along the way. But I'm like, that would be great to get a kit and then spend like a couple months where basically most days I'm spending a couple hours on it. And then at the end, you have like a finished acoustic guitar. So any hobbies that are on the horizon that you've been putting off, you want to get started, maybe an instrument, language, whatever?
I can go first. Something I'm excited about and that we intend to start as early as this month is fishing. It's when I was a kid, up through like middle school, I used to go fishing quite a bit, and then just stopped. Interests and hobbies changed, but we live fairly close to the Potomac River, and there's a lot of natural areas out here around us, and I want to get back into fishing. And I feel like it could be something that's as easy as enjoying solitude by the water and just seeing what I do or do not catch. Or it could be, I get the sense that it could be endlessly full of new things to explore and new types of tackle and new types of fish to understand. So I feel like it could be as easy or as difficult as I want it to be.
And from what I can tell from books and other things, some people make it very central to their identity. So we already do a lot of hiking and kayaking. So we're not, without hobbies. And we're looking forward to sort of building on that to maybe do camping and things like that. And then, fishing would be a natural thing to build on top of those things. I think I've, and maybe you too, have talked about wanting to learn an instrument. We both played when we were younger, but not for a very long time. And it just never seems like we have the time and energy to do that now. We don't even have kids or anything, but still with the work and just, keeping up social life and friends and a family and stuff. So I hope to do that, but you also sort of touched upon, or what I took from something you were saying was, actually producing something physical. And that's something that's very attractive to me, very intriguing to me. And that's not what I do at work now. And so it is something I want to try. I'm sort of intimidated by, I don't have the skills to do any of these things. And so you have to learn the skills and you have to invest, the time and money and getting the tools you need to do those things. And then hopefully you actually enjoy it. And, hopefully you are reasonably good at it and maybe you even earn some money at it, if things go really well. So there's a little bit of anxiety about do you invest all that time and money about something that you don't really know that you'll enjoy? But I think that's just you have to do it. That's the only way to find out is to do that. But I've also thought that we're a little constrained living in DC in a condo. It's a very comfortable amount of space for the two of us and our dog, but there's not there's no garage, there's no workshop area that people that live in different situations have. So I find it really attractive and interesting to have some, craft that I'm pursuing that comes up with something practical, but I think there's some constraints here, and there's a lot of advantages to living in the area. For a same-sex couple, it's a very safe and welcoming place to live, which not every place is, and not every place that would, be easier to have a garage or a workshop and have that kind of space, and that's affordable and plausible. So it's a trade-off for us that, we'll get other advantages by living here. That might be one that we're constrained on that I'm still working through how to think about.
So, Lewis, I wonder if you could do I'll back up a second here. Todd, one of the people I mentioned earlier, we have a co-working space here in Longmont, which is just a bunch of machines, and they'll teach you to weld. They've got all kinds of metal fabrication machines, and everything is in there. I've been to this place, and it's only $50 a month. You might want to look for something like that if you haven't already.
Yeah.
What instruments do you guys play?
When I was a kid through high school, I played piano, cello, and trombone.
And I played piano and saxophone.
Okay. Wait, what would you guys pick up again?
Guitar and keyboard are the ones that I'm interested in trying.
Yeah, I'd like us to get a keyboard and get back into piano. And then we have a guitar that we've owned for years that just sits very nicely as a piece of art in our living room that we keep talking about.
It's fun.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So we've had a good part of this discussion talking about the benefits of the freedom that comes with this new normal and the time and reclaiming your time and energy to your own priorities. But what have you also found to be the most challenging aspect of all of this new time and flexibility to work with?
Well, for me, and I've alluded to it a couple times, is I still try to be a little too productive. So it's just instilled in us, and a lot of people that are aiming for early retirement or at least have it on the horizon, we're pretty good workers. We like to be ambitious and do things. So it's been hard to like take the time off and really try to figure that piece of it out. So as I said, I've just been trying to be lazy, like literally just blank out days on the calendar where I'm like, all right, I'm not scheduling anything that day. And it's been good. It's been good overall, kind of awkward, but as time goes on, I feel much better. Yesterday was a good example. I think I sent a couple emails in the morning and then mostly sat around most of the day. And I had a beer or two at like 2 or 3 in the afternoon and just hung out with Georgie. My wife's out of town. So it was literally a very, very low productivity day. And it was great. I had an awesome time.
Yeah. And for me, it's just, and this is a very good problem to have. It's just saying no to things when after I stopped working, I said yes to everything and found myself busier than I ever was when I had a job. So that leads to a toxic lifestyle and not good. There's what's the Derek Sivers thing? Like it's either a hell yeah or it's a no. And I think that's very applicable. If you don't feel real strongly about the offer, your default should be to turn it down.
And just a quick note of self-awareness. So the most challenging thing for Carl and I, you had too much fun shit to do, right? You kept saying yes to all these great opportunities. And then I was like, I'm too productive. So we are aware how dumb that sounds, but that's where we found ourselves, right? Anything to add? That's accurate, right?
Yeah, we sound like a couple of assholes right now, but I guess
but look, we know that we're assholes. Yeah,
we know you're assholes, YouTube. You don't have to call us out. We already know.
Leave comments on YouTube. Yeah, those always are
I was
good.
About to say.
Yeah. I'm sleeping too much and getting too much rest. That's another thing. Just kidding. All right. Is there anything that you think that might be challenging? Anything you guys are worried about, knowing your personalities and stuff?
I think we've talked about a lot of the things that I think are going to be challenging, and just mostly like the psychological change, and how not to get overcommitted and how not to get so unstructured that, I go crazy.
Perfect.
I think actually the other thing is we spend so much of our non-work time together because, we like spending time with each other, that I think it will be strange to either like figuring out how to still spend a lot of time together, but not overdo it potentially. And that might take some trial and error, which doesn't sound like much fun. If we decide we're spending too much fun together, that doesn't sound like a particularly great experience. To like have an argument about it, but that's one thing that we'll have to figure out, because the default would be to just spend all our time together, which sounds great in the short term, but maybe not in the medium to long term.
Yeah, I actually added that question. We'll talk about that in a couple of questions. But yeah, Lewis is going to be like, Clark, get the hell out of the house. I need some alone time.
Okay, what's next here?
Maybe sort of related to the past discussion topic, but is there an aspect of early retirement that you really enjoyed, but you hadn't considered in advance?
Yeah, you have so much energy in your life. So you two have pretty, I imagine, maybe stressful, rigorous jobs. I'm probably describing it poorly, but I'm sure your jobs take a lot out of you. And I noticed with my job, you'd get up, you'd go to work, and at the end of the day, you've given a lot to your job. So you don't feel like working out and it's hard to keep a proper diet because, screw it, I'm just going to have the Cheetos or whatever. But now you wake up and you don't have anything to do except answer to yourself. So the increased willpower, you could do my workouts are better than ever. I never did more than one pull-up in my entire life. I did 10 after I retired. I can do the intermittent fasting because I can push through. So the stress and the not having to put energy towards a job, you could funnel that energy into positive things in life. And so valuable, so good.
Yep, 100% agree with the willpower. And then for me, a piece is like the autonomy and just being able to do whatever at random times of the day. Really enjoy that. And more specifically, I like being outside a lot versus the basement down here. There's no windows on this side, so we have a lot of light, so it's bright, but it is great. I always feel better to go walk in the morning, a couple other walks in the afternoon, and just being able to do that. I mean, I guess it wasn't too surprising, but I can do more and more of that. And generally, it seems like the more walking outside, like there's no upper limit. Like I always feel better and I could always go on another walk. So kind of small, but I enjoy it.
Oh, it's so nice to take walks. That's one of my other favorite things. That you might go out for 15 minutes and then 2 hours later, you're wandering around just looking at shit or talking to people. And I guess just taking life at a more leisurely pace. I'm thinking like earlier this week, I was in Trader Joe's and I was just wandering around looking at all the shit they have there because we don't have a Trader Joe's near us. So when you go there, it's kind of, you got to make an effort. And I spent an hour in there. And the really weird thing was I'm an introvert. People scare the shit out of me. And I had like conversations with two people at Trader Joe's, like two strangers. This one lady was like, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." She's like, "I see you have a chocolatey stout and these almond cookies. Is your plan to dip the cookies in the stout?" I'm like, "Well, it wasn't until right now."
Now it is.
Now it is. It's just fun like that. And I don't know why that happens. I guess you're just happier and more leisurely. I seem more approachable, I guess.
Yeah. Where was this at? Where was Mindy? It sounds like you got a date out of that. So what was this lady's name?
I don't know what her name was. Yeah. The other one, she's like, "I don't know if you're gluten-free or not, but I highly recommend these." I'm like, "I'm not, but what the hell? I'll give them a try."
What town were you in?
It was in Boulder.
Okay. So you were out like, that's like a dating scene, right? It sounds like, I mean, you're walking around Trader Joe's and all these ladies are coming up to you.
I guess so. Things like that never happen. I don't know what was going on that day. Maybe it was a beautiful day. That was the thing. I had just gone for a hike. It was our first real nice day of the year. So I just hiked Sanitas and everyone's in a good mood. So I guess everyone was just happy. Maybe there was some.
Don't sell yourself short, man. You're a good catch. Mindy doesn't listen to these, so it's fine. We can say that stuff.
You're making me think twice about the spending time apart thing. Like maybe
Clark, you said you were going to be home 3 hours ago. Where are you?
Yeah, and we, find my phone or whatever. Find your friends. It's like, why are you still at Trader Joe's?
Yeah, you've been there 4 times this week.
Okay.
Any follow-ups?
Yeah.
I found it interesting, the willpower answer. That's something I hadn't considered before. And I think if anything, I thought it would go the other way. So like your answer was both intuitive and counterintuitive at the same time, that I often feel like maybe because I'm just so used to the structure that, when I have to do things, that's when I'm most productive. And I like gather my energy up to go do it because I have to get it done. And then when I do have breaks, then my willpower sort of fades away because like, that's my break. Like I'm so used to using my willpower that way. So I think I hadn't considered the fact that, it'd sort of just be a very different mindset, that you wouldn't have had to just like steel yourself and go in there and do all those things and use up your willpower. And so since you didn't have to do that, you have it for other things.
Yeah. And maybe part of it is I had the willpower to plow through my job and now I'm just refocusing. Now I can take that same energy and apply it to me, which is even more powerful because I'm not helping whoever get rich or whatever. I'm doing something for myself and you feel even more energetic about it.
All right. Next question.
All right. Well, I guess as a segue from the dating scene at Trader Joe's, our next question is about your social relationships and your friendships. Now that you have the flexibility and the openness where you aren't at a standard Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 job, but suspect most of your friends and family are. We're curious to what extent do your social expectations change, or how do you have to shift your expectations of how you spend time with others when you have just a completely different mindset of how you use your time?
I'm going to say another pretty privileged asshole thing, and that is, like, I don't really enjoy the weekends like I enjoy a Monday or Tuesday now, because you got to go to Home Depot and there's like a billion people there and you got to wait in line. Like, that's probably the worst part of my life, waiting in line in traffic. Again, send the hate mail to Doug. But yeah, and it changes your social life too, because now I'm like, I don't want to hike Mount Sanitas on a Saturday. You're not going to be able to park anywhere near it. There's going to be a billion people there. It's terrible. So you kind of change the way you do things, and a lot of that stuff moves to weekly activities. And this kind of speaks to what we talked about earlier in building your community. If you link up with other Fi people, you're going to be doing stuff on like Tuesday afternoon that no one else is doing. I just went out to San Diego to visit another Fi friend, David Boyer, the Phiology guy, and that's what we did. We're like hiking every day on like Tuesday and Wednesday. And I remember one time it was a great hike. We're right close to the border. You could see Mexico, and like there's no one else out there. We are the only ones. So
that's awesome.
Might be a weak, jerky answer, but what do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I agree. I love going to the grocery store like middle of the day or like late morning on weekdays. It's just quieter. There's not as many people, traffic's less and all that. And again, I sort of came into this a little bit different. So before I moved to Longmont, I was working remotely, number one, and then eventually I got laid off. So I had a lot of flexibility beforehand. Also, I ended up meeting a lot of people that had sort of non-traditional jobs also. So they were sort of freelancing, or they had some, different time constraints than a normal 9 to 5. So we were able to do a handful of things, during the day or something like that. So it helped out. And I think one of the other things is like, you'll probably just have to deal with the constraints that other people have, but you're just way more flexible. So you're like, sure, yeah, like whatever works for y'all's schedule. Like if you go on a trip with another couple or something like that, then you'll figure it out. And then the side note, and I think this happens with, my wife and I, we don't have kids either. So as our friends started having kids, like you just stop hanging out and like things naturally like work themselves out. There's no hard feelings, but they have other shit to do and we don't want to be around kids. So that's just the way things work out. So that may happen. Again, no hard feelings, but you may find yourselves hanging out with other folks. Then when we moved here to Longmont, it took probably like 6 months before I joined the co-working space, and then like probably another 6 or 9 months before I slowly started making more friends. I don't have that many friends, I guess. I'm pretty content just doing my own thing. It's weird, I think. I mean, I like having friends, but I'm fine in a social situation, right? I seem normal.
Yeah, you're super well adjusted. You would have like 10x the Trader Joe's experience that I had. You'd probably be you got busy in the Trader Joe's bathroom.
We should do a vlog there, just see what happens. Especially like, we're doing the fitness challenge stuff. So we're looking better and better every day, especially for the people listening on the podcast. You won't believe how strong we look right now. Guys, don't you think? Like
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, not on YouTube. Don't worry about it, but the podcast listeners can go with that. So yeah, I lost my train of thought. Carl, reel me back in. What are we talking about here?
We were talking about relationships, and you were saying how you're content by yourself, and you asked me how you are as a person. Yeah, you're super good. Like we go to these conferences and I'm sitting there and Doug's like talking to 500 different people. So yeah, I would not have thought that about you, Doug.
So So all that to say is your social circle may shift a little bit. And do you know anyone else in your sort of circle of friends or community that are kind of on the same track? Anyone else that are interested in it, or at least know what the hell you're doing?
We don't, as far as we know, we don't have any of our friends who are on the same track. We've brought this up with two couples that we're very close to as friends, and they've been very supportive and excited for us. But to the discussion earlier today, they weren't all at the same time that they were excited for us. They were not actively asking for advice on how they could do the same thing. So I think that it'll, I guess, just be something we figure out as we go.
One quick follow-up is one thing. Most of my interactions during the day are with either senior citizens, like you go to the rec center where I go to work out, and there's lots of seniors there playing pickleball. And I think I'm going to learn to play pickleball, actually. I've been meaning to.
Okay.
So, yeah, you end up, and they're very talkative, like seniors. I think some of them are kind of lonely, which makes me sad, but they always want to talk. And then young single mothers, like you go to a park and it's ladies pushing around strollers. So those are the two random interactions you have. But yeah, try to find a community. And what you said, Doug, I think applied to me too. A lot of our friends with jobs, we still see them, but it's probably much less. And yeah, no hard feelings. We've just kind of drifted away. We're still friends. It's just once or twice a year instead of once or twice a month.
Mm-hmm. All right. And coming up next here, Carl has an addition. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I put this one in here, and this is how do I maintain a healthy relationship with my partner in early retirement? And I asked my wife, Mindy, this, who, by the way, Doug was kidding back there. We have a very good relationship. I don't go to Trader Joe's to actively or passively pick up other partners.
I mean, it's not why you go, but it's not a bad thing. So, just kidding. No one send emails to Mindy.
No, you can. I qualified it now, so it's okay. Hopefully they don't turn off the podcast after that and then send her the message right there. Like, your husband's picking up people at Trader Joe's. Any case, we were at the rec center yesterday. I was walking with her and I told her about this. I'm like, do you have any comments for this episode or any advice to give Lewis and Clark? And she had something that was pretty interesting. She's the host of the Bigger Pockets Money podcast. So she's interviewing people and she's on a couple of Facebook groups. And I think some of this might come from her personal experience too. So I'm going to qualify what she said with that. And that is, a lot of wives get annoyed by fired husbands. And her quote was, "He's up in my shit all the time now." Some people overreact because they feel they have to contribute, so they start doing stuff without the approval of their partners. So I'm like, what kind of stuff are they doing? And she's like, well, they'll do stuff like rearrange the pots and pans or redo the kitchen, and the wife doesn't want this, never asked for this.
Yeah.
And he might be around all the time, which causes problems. I know I've done some of this shit. Like I'll do things in the kitchen that Mindy is not happy with. And that's actually led to some tension. And I guess my advice for that would be just communicate with each other. And I think the thing with us too, I love Mindy, we're great, all that shit. But if I had to be around her 24/7, we would kill each other. That'd just be terrible. And we had a little bit of taste of that during COVID, right? You're around your partner all the time. I think most people, no matter how extroverted you are, need their alone time. Mm-hmm. And we kind of talked about that a little bit. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Doug.
Well, I want to talk about the phrasing here. So they start doing stuff without the approval of their partner. And what is the approval process in your household? Do you have to submit a form, or is there some kind of thing you got to do?
Yeah, there is a form. Sometimes it goes to an arbitration board if we can't agree on it. Yeah, if I don't do it, there's punishment involved. You haven't seen the new stuff in our basement, but have you ever heard about the torture museum in Romania in the basement there?
I haven't.
Yeah, Google that. It's
okay.
It's not pleasant, and neither are some parts of my basement.
Well, and on our side, again, my wife and I worked remotely for several years, so we were kind of around each other all the time. But we struggled with it back then, especially, for example, I would work in the home office and then I would get up, get some water, grab a snack, and I would be actively thinking about whatever it is that I was working on before. And she wouldn't realize that I was like working because it looked like I was just getting water. So that was a little frustrating to just be around each other and then get interrupted, in my head. I felt like I was getting interrupted, but that we slowly developed the skills to be around each other very often. However, we do have separate hobbies, and my wife tries to do things to get out a little bit more. I lucked out like finding the Fi community here. So a lot of my friends are just, from the co-working space and people we know that are also retired. But my wife, she's been in a couple bowling leagues around here, and she's in a curling league right now. So she's meeting like new people and like getting out, and I could, join with her for some of these things, but I think it's important for her to like do her own shit and meet her own friends, like unrelated to me and all that kind of stuff. So I try to be conscious of that because I think it's important. She also plays tennis and she's in a league. So she's doing all these other activities to meet other folks and, just go to practice ice down at the curling center on a weekend for a couple hours, stuff like that.
So, Doug, I do have one quick follow-up, and I hope this doesn't derail the interview, but she's out of town right now, and we actually had a conversation. She was asking me what the Trader Joe's scene is like in New York City. She's at now.
Okay.
Be strong, Doug.
Thanks for letting me know.
Sure.
It's good information.
Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out for us because as I said earlier, I think our default is to basically spend all of our time when we're not working with each other. And it may be even as a same-sex couple, the like sociology, the dynamic is different. That, I think straight friends often, like the husbands will all go out, like the guys will all go out some nights, or the ladies will all go out some nights. And with a same-sex couple, there's not that natural, like half of the couple is going out. Clark is saying he wants to take up fishing. I'm like, oh, that sounds good. Like, yeah. but maybe we need to create some space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, that when we reach the other side of the like sabbatical feel of this and start getting back into local volunteering or some kind of consulting side gig, I think that that's also where we'll see a bit of a divergence that if, if I want to go do something with a local nonprofit, that doesn't mean that Lewis is going to be, sitting at my side as I'm meeting with them and doing that consulting work at the same time.
And one side note too is my wife and I have started taking more like solo trips to either visit family or other friends, which is good in some ways. Like it's a few more responsibilities, walking the dog and stuff like that. But it's good to just have like 2 or 3 days where it's like you only talk maybe once every day and a half or something like that. And I don't know, maybe it's like every 6 months or something, but we're trying to do a little bit more of that. Carl, did you guys do that?
We do. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I just went out to San Diego to visit David. Mindy was talking about going to Ohio for reasons unknown. Are there Trader Joe's in Ohio?
There must be something like even Kroger's are going to be okay.
The selection might not quite be as good, but I'm like, well, if you go there, do you mind? I'd like to go to San Diego again. I'll go see David. So yeah, I think you don't have to be together with all the time. And if the other partner has a problem with that, there's probably issues with the relationship, I would say. But yeah.
All right. Nice.
We've done the math to know that we should be fine with our investments and with money. But we expect watching our savings and investments get spent down over time to be difficult to get used to while we're used to seeing it grow, not used to seeing it go down. Do you have any suggestions from your experience on going from an earner and investor mindset to being, a spender?
Yeah, and this is something, we'll qualify this, another asshole comment. Neither Doug or I have to deal with this because Doug makes money, his wife makes money, and my wife makes money. So I'm wife-fi or spouse-fi. Mm-hmm. So none of us have had to deal with that. So I asked Todd, who is doing this, and he said, living out of the 4% rule is scary as shit. You will need to be patient, but with time, that fear subsides. I looked at another. Have you ever heard of Michael Kitces? He's a financial advisor with a blog. He goes into all kinds of numbers. He had a post about the 4% rule, and we'll link to this in the show notes. And I'd just like to read this. He says, the reality is that in the overwhelming majority of scenarios, returns are not so bad to necessitate a 4% initial withdrawal rate in the first place. In fact, by applying the 4% rule, over 2/3 of the time, the retiree finishes the 30 years with more than double their wealth at the beginning of retirement on top of a lifetime of spending. And that's per the 4% rule. Half the time, wealth is nearly tripled by the end of retirement as retirees fail to spend their upside. So I think just knowing that when it comes time for Mitty and I to start spending it down gives me a lot of confidence.
Mm-hmm. And yep, as Carl said, we haven't had to do that. I think it would be probably more scary for my wife as she's a little more conservative financially. But on a day-to-day level, I'm okay with spending. I mean, I was always a decent saver, but I also enjoy buying stuff. So you may have heard me mention in the last year, I've purchased like 3 guitars, like very nice guitars. And I didn't feel bad about it. It was fun researching it. I like playing the guitars. I'm taking guitar lessons. So like I'm getting something out of it, but I had no issue spending like what would be appalling for me in previous years to spend that amount on just like random guitars that I can't even play that well. Like if a real musician had it, they could like tour the world, right? Like these are good guitars, but I'm like, it's fun to get them. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I'm okay with spending money and I know it's probably going to be okay. And I was just trying to, treat myself a little bit. So yeah. Where do you guys think you land on this?
Yeah, I think that part of our financial planning preparation for this is saving up, I guess, what is essentially a 2-year emergency fund in any money market. So should the stock market crash on October 1st, we don't have to have any immediate panic. And then, as we talked about earlier in this, if something goes dreadfully wrong and we can't get a job, we have increased our lines of credit to buy us some more time to try to solve that problem. But I think that, sometimes we hear folks talking on financial independence podcasts and writing about how they actually spend a lot less than they planned. And that, when you're not commuting, when you're not buying work clothes, when you're not eating lunch out at the office every day, that your costs just change. So I think we're trying to get ourselves in a mental place where we can have an initial 3-month kind of vacation and spend money, do travel that we haven't done before. And then we expect to see our spending decrease. And a lot of the hobbies that we have just generally don't need to include aren't necessarily expensive. I mean, anything can be as expensive as you want it to be, but going hiking can also not be expensive at all. So I don't know. What do you think?
I'm having a few different reactions. The quote you read, reminds me of those Monte Carlo simulations that we've done, by ourselves and we've done with the Downshift guys. And I see that the most often we may end up when we pass away, with significantly more money than we have when we stop working. It also seems like that's just ridiculous. That's not true. How could that possibly be true? That just doesn't seem right. But I get it. I get the math. I just don't trust it. I, for some reason, trust the math that we're financially prepared to do this. I just don't trust the math that at the end we will have this absurd amount of money. And then I also don't trust the idea that our expenses will really go down when we leave for work, because we don't spend a lot of money on work clothes, and we don't spend like massive, particularly now that you're working at home most of the time. After the pandemic started, the lunches out and stuff, like it's not really that expensive. And I feel like we'll travel and do stuff more. So I'm always worried that we're underestimating how much we're going to spend or want to spend. I know, we definitely can spend less, and this emergency fund could get us through 2 years, but, not with the travel that we're hoping to do, and not with, spending a lot more money on crazy guitars that people can tour the world with. And so maybe not the standard of living we're expecting. So I don't know. It's interesting that, to me, to look at myself where I understand the math, I trust the math, I'm ready to jump off the cliff, but then there's parts of it that I just like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. That's not the way that's going to go.
Yeah, I don't think it'll sink in until it actually happens. But a lot of the things I found, and we're a little bit restricted because we still have children, but if it's just you two and you want to travel to Brazil or wherever you're going, you can go in the off season, and instead of going for a week on an Airbnb, you can find a great house to rent, or maybe ingratiate yourself with the FI community. And there's always people looking to do house trades. So a lot of stuff does become cheaper. Doug lives a little bit over 3 miles from me, and I'll often walk to his house, and it's not even to save money. It's just for my own health, but it saves money. And I wouldn't have had time to do that if I had a job.
Do you own stock in Trader Joe's?
Is it a publicly held company? It seems like it's probably owned, but I'm going to after this.
No, we got to check this out.
We're looking for sponsors.
All right. Well, before we finish off here, we want to thank you, Lewis and Clark, for sending in these questions. And I'm curious, and it's okay if you don't, but do you have any, parting thoughts or anything after we've had this conversation, any kind of broad conclusions that either of you have come to?
I think for me, kind of the broad conclusion is, as with the rest of life, you can only be certain with a tiny aspect of your world, and the rest of it you can plan as best you can and save as best you can and talk through the different scenarios. But unless you're actually willing to move forward with it, then it's all for a hypothetical brain game. So I think it's helpful to have this discussion and be reminded of everyone's experience is a little different. And even when you think you have it all planned out, it's probably not going to turn out that way. And that's all right.
I'd say I agree with all that. And it's been more helpful than I would have anticipated to have this conversation with you, because we listen to podcasts and we read things. And so, we get other input, but it is a lot of us talking to each other about it, because it's not, Americans don't talk about money with friends and family very much. And particularly with this non-traditional route we're taking, it doesn't feel like we can talk to people about what we're worried about or what we're hoping for. So it's a lot of just like talking two of us. So it's interesting to sort of expand it and get different input, not just by reading a blog or something, but by actually talking to people.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've got one more thought, and then I have some homework for you too. My thought is, after I left my job, I remember thinking like maybe 3 months out, I'm like, I'd go back, but they'd have to give me a 50% increase. And then after 6 months, I'm like, I'd go back, but they'd have to like double my pay. And then like after a year, I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm going back. This is so good, and I'm so happy with where I'm at. And I hope it works out the same for you. I think it'll actually be even better, because I think you two are in a better place than I was even now, maybe. But my homework for you two is, I'd appreciate it if you keep notes. And I'm saying this because we'd love to have you on for a follow-up episode, and maybe even two if you're amenable to it. So we'd love to hear how your thoughts evolve, and maybe talk to you again like in October, and then maybe 6 months after that, and they can just be short format episodes. They don't have to be this, but it'd be great to hear, turn these questions back on you, what turned out different and things like that. So yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the show. That was the MHFi podcast, and I'm Doug Cunnington, the balder host, and Carl Jensen is the cool, sexy one. If you dig the show, please do 3 things for us. Number 1, tell a friend, a family member, an enemy about the show. We really don't care who you tell. Maybe forward them a specific show that you know that they will like. It's the single most helpful thing that you can do to spread the word. It's like giving us a virtual high five, and actually we don't give high fives in person, so the virtual kind's pretty good. And more importantly, your friend or family member or even your enemy will appreciate the fact that you were thinking of them. Number 2, make sure you're following or subscribed on your podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, whatever you're using, and that way you won't miss a show. And number 3, please leave us a rating and review. We read them on the show occasionally, and you might hear yours out there on an upcoming episode. Quick disclaimer, this show is not financial or legal advice. I'd actually be surprised if it sounded like it. It's really just for entertainment, and that's at least what we're hoping for. But seriously, get advice from professionals. Carl and I are just 2 guys with microphones that sit in my basement and talk. So we'll catch y'all next week.